She arrived in Texas with nothing but a trunk and letters from a stranger, and within a week she'd be stitching his life back together with her bare hands. This is the story of Eliza Hartwell, a woman who gambled everything on a man she'd never seen, and discovered that love on the frontier isn't found in promises. It's forged in blood, dirt, and choices that can't be undone. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in what could barely be called a town. Eliza Hartwell pressed her gloved hand against the rain-streaked window and felt her stomach drop. This wasn't Sonora. This wasn't even close. "End of the line, miss." The driver's voice came muffled through the wooden wall separating them. She pushed the door open herself. No one came to help, and stepped down into ankle-deep mud. The rain came sideways, cold and mean, soaking through her traveling coat in seconds. Around her there was nothing. A single building that might have been a trading post, shuttered tight. A hitching post with no horses. Wagon ruts filled with brown water that looked deep enough to swallow a child. "Wait!" she called up to the driver, who was already turning the team. "This can't be right. I paid passage to Sonora." "River's up," he said, not looking at her. "Can't cross. Sonora's another 15 miles south. You want to wait it out. There's a boarding house 2 days back." 2 days? He shrugged. "Or you walk." And then he was gone. The stage rattling back the way it had come, leaving her standing in the storm with a trunk she couldn't lift, and a piece of paper in her pocket that suddenly felt like the worst decision she'd ever made. She pulled it out anyway. The ink had bled in places, but she'd read it enough times to know the words by heart. "Miss Hartwell, if you're willing to take the risk, I believe we could build something decent here. It won't be easy, and I won't lie to you about that. But I need a partner, and if the letters we've exchanged mean anything, I think you need a new start as much as I do. Wire me your answer. If it's yes, I'll be waiting. Caleb Turner." She folded the letter and put it back in her pocket. Then she looked down at her trunk. Good leather, still sturdy, packed with everything she owned, and made a choice. She opened it right there in the mud, pulled out what she could carry in a canvas bag, and left the rest. 2 dresses, a shawl, the small wooden box that held her mother's wedding ring, a book she probably wouldn't have time to read. She didn't let herself think about what she was leaving behind. Then she started walking. The road, if it could be called that, was more of a suggestion. Wagon ruts, mostly. Sometimes they disappeared entirely under the floodwater, and she had to guess where solid ground might be. Her boots were soaked through in the first mile. Her skirt dragged heavy with mud. The rain didn't let up. She'd imagined this moment 100 times on the train west. She'd pictured stepping off into a new life, into sunlight and possibility. She'd pictured Caleb waiting for her, maybe awkward but kind, offering his hand. She'd pictured something other than this, but she kept walking. Somewhere in the second hour, she started talking to herself. Not out loud, just in her head, the way she used to when she was a girl and her father would lose his temper over something small. "You chose this. You bought the ticket. You wrote the letters. You told him yes. So stop feeling sorry for yourself and keep moving." It didn't help much, but it kept her feet going. The landscape around her was flat and endless, broken only by low scrub and the occasional skeletal tree. Everything looked gray under the storm clouds. She passed a burned-out homestead, just a chimney, and some charred beams, and felt a cold twist in her chest. People had tried to make a life here and failed. She was walking toward the same gamble. By the third hour, her hands were shaking, not from cold, though she was cold, from something else. Doubt, maybe. Or the crushing weight of how alone she was. She'd left Philadelphia with nothing but anger and desperation, her father's debts, the shame of it, the men who'd come to the door, polite at first, then less so, the friends who'd stopped calling, the slow suffocation of a life that had already decided what she was worth, and then the advertisement in the paper. Rancher seeking correspondence with respectable woman of good character. Object, matrimony. She'd written the first letter as a joke, a dare to herself. But Caleb's response had been so plainly honest that she'd written a second, and then a third. And somewhere in those exchanges, she'd started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be someone different out here. Someone who wasn't buried under her father's mistakes. But now, alone in the storm, that belief felt thin. She stopped to catch her breath and realized she'd been crying without noticing. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mud across her cheek, and laughed. a small, bitter sound that got swallowed by the wind. "What are you doing, Eliza?" she said out loud this time. No answer, just rain. She started walking again. It was nearly dark when she heard the horse. At first, she thought she'd imagined it, but then she heard it again, hoofbeats, coming fast. She turned, heart pounding, and saw a rider coming up the road behind her. For a wild second, she thought about running, but there was nowhere to go, and she was too tired anyway, so she just stood there, bag clutched to her chest, and waited. The rider slowed as he approached. A man, broad-shouldered, hat pulled low against the rain. He stopped a few feet away and dismounted, boots hitting the mud with a heavy squelch. "Miss Hartwell." His voice was deep, rough-edged. She couldn't see his face clearly in the failing light, but she could see enough. Tall, solid, clothes worn and practical. No coat, just a shirt soaked through and clinging to his frame. "How did you—" She stopped. "Caleb?" "Yeah." He took a step closer, and she saw his eyes, dark, serious, looking her over like he was assessing damage. "Stage driver came through an hour ago. Said he'd left a woman at the crossing. Figured it was you." She didn't know what to say. She'd expected to meet him at his ranch in daylight, with time to compose herself, not like this, not looking like something dragged out of a river. "I thought you'd wait," he said, "for the water to go down." "I didn't want to wait." He studied her for a moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. Not quite approval, but maybe respect or surprise. "You walked 15 miles in this?" "Closer to 8, I think." She tried to sound steady, but her voice shook. "I left my trunk. I'm sorry. I know that's— I'll get it tomorrow." He turned to his horse and started untying a rolled blanket from behind the saddle. "Come here." She hesitated, and he glanced back at her. "You're shaking," he said, "and it's going to be full dark in 10 minutes. I'm not going to hurt you, but I'm also not going to stand here and argue while you freeze." She stepped forward, and he draped the blanket around her shoulders. It smelled like horse and smoke and something else she couldn't name. He moved with a kind of rough efficiency, adjusting it so it covered her properly, his hands quick and impersonal. "Can you ride?" he asked. Yes, I think so." "Good." He took the bag from her hands and secured it to the saddle, then turned back and held out his arms. "I'm going to lift you up. Don't fight me." Before she could respond, his hands were at her waist, and then she was airborne. He set her in the saddle like she weighed nothing, steadying her with one hand while he adjusted the stirrups with the other. "Hold on to the horn," he said. "I'll walk beside you." "You're going to walk?" "Horse can't carry us both through this mud. Not safely." "But I'm already wet," he finished, "and I know the way. Just hold on." He took the reins and started forward, and the horse moved beneath her with a lurching gait that made her grab the saddle horn with both hands. Caleb walked ahead, steady and unbothered by the rain, his shoulders set against the wind. They didn't talk. There was nothing to say. And the storm made conversation impossible anyway. Eliza focused on staying in the saddle, on the rhythm of the horse's movement, on the dark shape of Caleb leading them through the night. She'd imagined meeting him 100 times, but never like this. In her mind, he'd been smaller, somehow, less certain. The letters he'd written had been careful, almost tentative. This man didn't seem tentative at all. After what felt like hours, she saw a light in the distance, faint but steady. "That's it," Caleb called back to her. "Not much further." The light grew as they approached, resolving into a lantern hanging from the porch of a low, rough-built house. It wasn't much, single-story, wooden, functional, but it looked solid. Behind it, she could just make out the shapes of a barn and a few outbuildings. Caleb led the horse right up to the porch and stopped. "Can you get down?" "I think so." She tried, but her legs had gone stiff and uncooperative. She started to slip, and Caleb caught her, his hand steadying her as she found her feet. "Easy," he said. "You've been sitting too long." She nodded, not trusting her voice. He let go of her carefully, like he wasn't sure she'd stay upright, then grabbed her bag and gestured toward the door. "Go on inside. I'll take care of the horse." "I can help. You can get warm," he said, and there was no arguing with the tone. "Go." She went. The inside of the house was dark, but warmer than outside. She stood just inside the door, dripping on the floorboards, and waited for her eyes to adjust. Slowly, shapes emerged. A table, chairs, a stove in the corner, still radiating faint heat. Shelves with tin dishes. A single window shuttered against the storm. It was small, sparse. Nothing like the house she'd grown up in, with its heavy furniture and thick carpets and constant sense of barely managed chaos. This was clean, ordered, a place built for function, not show. She heard Caleb's boots on the porch, and then he was inside, shaking water off his hat. He hung it on a peg by the door, then moved past her to the stove. He worked quickly, adding wood, coaxing the fire back to life. Light bloomed in the room, warm and flickering. He turned to look at her, and for the first time she saw him clearly. He was older than she'd expected. Not old, but weathered. Maybe 30, maybe a little more. His face was lean, tanned, dark from the sun, with lines around his eyes that came from squinting into distance. His jaw was shadowed with a few days' worth of stubble. His hair was dark, too long, pushed back from his forehead. He looked tired, but his eyes, when they met hers, they were steady. Assessing, but not unkind. "You should get out of those wet clothes," he said. "I'll turn around." She felt her face heat. Everything I have is wet." He crossed to a trunk in the corner, opened it, and pulled out a shirt. Plain, worn, soft. He tossed it to her. "It'll be big, but it's dry. I'll step outside." "You don't have to." "I'm going to check the barn," he said, already moving toward the door. "Make sure nothing's flooded. Take your time." And then he was gone, and she was alone in the house. She stood there for a moment, holding his shirt, trying to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. Then she shook herself, peeled off her wet dress, her fingers clumsy with cold, and pulled the shirt over her head. It hung to her knees, the sleeves past her hands. She rolled them up, then spread her dress over a chair near the stove to dry. When Caleb came back in, he didn't look at her directly, just moved to the shelves and started pulling down food, bread, cheese, a jar of something that might have been preserves. "You hungry?" he asked. She was starving, she realized. "Yes." He set the food on the table, then poured water from a pitcher into 2 cups. "Sit." She sat. He sat across from her, and they ate in silence. The bread was dense and slightly stale, but she didn't care. The cheese was sharp and good. She ate until the tight, anxious knot in her stomach started to ease. "Thank you," she said finally. "For coming to find me. You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did," he said. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You wrote that you were coming. I told you I'd be waiting. If I'd left you out there, I'd be a liar and a coward. Still, I know it was—" She stopped. "I'm not what you expected." "What do you think I expected?" She laughed, a short, helpless sound. "Someone less this." "This?" "A mess." He shook his head slowly. "You walked 8 miles in a storm to get here. That's not a mess. That's a choice." She looked down at her hands. "Maybe it was a stupid choice." "Maybe," he agreed. "But you made it anyway. That tells me something." "What?" "That you're serious." She met his eyes. "Are you? I wouldn't have asked you to come if I wasn't." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "But I need to know if you're still serious now that you've seen what this is, because it's not going to get easier. This ranch, it's barely holding on. I work from sunup to sundown, and some days I still don't have enough. If you stay, it'll be hard. Harder than what you left behind, probably." "What I left behind wasn't worth keeping," she said quietly. "Then we're starting from the same place." He paused. "I'm not going to lie to you and say I can promise you comfort. I can't. But I can promise I'll work, and I can promise I won't cheat you or hurt you or waste what you bring to this." "What do I bring to this?" she asked. "I don't know how to ranch. I don't know how to do half the things you probably need done." "You'll learn." He said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. "And in the meantime, you'll bring what you already know. Reading, writing, sense. You taught school back east, didn't you? For 2 years. Then you know how to manage a room full of chaos. That'll come in handy." He smiled, just a little. "And you got yourself here in one piece. That counts for a lot." She wanted to ask him more, about the ranch, about what he expected from her, about what would happen next, but exhaustion was pulling at her, heavy and insistent. "You're about to fall over," Caleb said, standing. "Come on." He led her to a narrow door at the back of the room. Behind it was a small bedroom, barely big enough for the bed and a single chair. A quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed, and the pillow looked lumpy but clean. "This is yours," he said. "I'll sleep out front." "Where?" "I've got a bedroll. I'll be fine." "Caleb, I can't take your bed." "You're not taking it. I'm giving it to you." He stepped back into the main room. "We'll talk more in the morning. Get some sleep." He closed the door, and she was alone. She sank onto the bed, still wearing his shirt, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the rain drummed on, relentless. Inside, the fire crackled softly. She thought about the letters she'd written, the careful, hopeful words she'd chosen, the version of herself she'd tried to present, capable, steady, ready for a new life. And then she thought about the version of herself who'd stumbled off that stagecoach, wet and scared and half convinced she'd made a terrible mistake. But Caleb hadn't seemed surprised by either version. He just pulled her onto his horse and brought her here. She closed her eyes and let herself sink into the bed. Tomorrow, she'd figure out what came next. Tonight, she was just grateful to be out of the storm. Morning came too soon and too bright. Eliza woke to the sound of something clattering in the next room and sat up, disoriented. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back: the storm, the walk, Caleb. She stood, smoothed down the oversized shirt she was still wearing, and opened the door. Caleb was at the stove, frying something in a pan. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard her. "Coffee's ready," he said. "Your dress is dry, more or less." She looked and saw it draped over the chair, stiff and wrinkled, but wearable. "Thank you." She changed quickly, feeling more like herself in her own clothes, even if they were travel-worn and mud-stained. When she came back out, Caleb had set 2 plates on the table, eggs and some kind of salted meat. They ate without talking at first. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, exactly, but it felt full of things unsaid. Finally, Caleb set down his fork and looked at her. "I figure we've got about a week before we should head into town. Get the license. Find someone to do the ceremony." Her stomach flipped. "A week? Unless you want longer." "No, She took a breath. It's real now." "It's been real," he said. But yeah, if you're having second thoughts, now's the time." She looked at him, this stranger she was about to bind her life to. His face was unreadable, but his hands were steady on the table and his eyes didn't waver. "I'm not having second thoughts," she said. "Are you? No? Then a week is fine." He nodded, and something in his expression eased. "Good. In the meantime, I'll show you around. You should know what you're getting into." The rain had stopped overnight, leaving the land washed clean and gleaming. Caleb led her out to the barn first, a sturdy structure that smelled of hay and horses. He introduced her to his 2 horses, a bay gelding named Sam and a smaller mare named Dusty, and showed her where he kept the tack, the feed, the tools. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I learned when I was young," she said, "but it's been years." "We'll fix that." He moved to the next stall where a cow stood chewing placidly. "This is Bess. She's temperamental, but she gives good milk. You'll need to learn how to handle her." "I've never milked a cow." "You will by tomorrow." He said it matter-of-factly, like it was already decided. They walked the property after that, past the chicken coop, the small vegetable garden that was mostly mud and hope, the fence line that needed mending. He pointed out where the creek ran when it wasn't flooded, where he planned to expand the grazing land, where the property line ended and the open range began. "It's not much yet," he said, stopping at the top of a low rise. "But it could be, if we work it right." Eliza looked out over the land, flat, wild, endless. It should have frightened her. Maybe it did, but it also felt like something she couldn't name yet. Possibility, maybe, or just space to breathe. "What do you need from me?" she asked. He turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what do you actually need? Everyone keeps talking about partnership, but what does that mean here? What do I do?" He thought about it. "Right now? You learn. You figure out how things work, and you tell me if something doesn't make sense, because I've been doing this alone so long I probably miss things." He paused. "Later, when you've got your feet under you, I'll need you to manage the house, the garden, maybe the chickens. And if we're lucky enough to grow this place, I'll need you to handle the money side. Records, buying and selling. I'm no good at that part." "I can do that," she said. "I kept books for my father's shop before he—" She stopped. "Before what?" She looked away. "Before he gambled it all away and left me with nothing." Caleb didn't react with pity or shock. He just nodded. That why you left? Part of it. The other part? I didn't want to spend my life cleaning up someone else's mistakes. She met his eyes. I wanted to make my own. He smiled at that, a real smile, not just a polite twitch of his mouth. Well, you'll get plenty of chance for that here. Over the next few days, Eliza learned more than she thought possible. Caleb was a patient teacher, but he didn't coddle her. When she struggled to saddle Dusty the first time, he showed her once, then stepped back and made her do it herself until she got it right. When she burned the biscuits, he ate them anyway and told her to try again tomorrow. When she couldn't get Bess to stand still for milking, he talked her through it, calm and steady, until the cow finally settled. She fell into bed exhausted every night, her hands blistered and her muscles aching. But she also felt something she hadn't felt in years, useful, needed. And Caleb, he was nothing like she'd expected. He wasn't charming or talkative. He didn't try to impress her, but he was solid. When he said he'd do something, he did it. When he gave his word, he kept it. And when she made a mistake, he didn't mock her or lose his patience. He just helped her fix it. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she asked him the question that had been circling in her mind. Why did you do this? She said. The advertisement, the letters. Why not just find someone here? He was quiet for a long moment. Because everyone here already knows me. And they know this place. And they've already decided it's not worth the risk. But I didn't know any of that. Exactly. He glanced at her. You were willing to take a chance on something you couldn't see. That told me you were braver than most people I know. Or more desperate. Maybe both. He leaned back, his eyes on the horizon. But I'll take desperate and brave over comfortable and careful any day. She thought about that. What if I'm not brave enough? You walked 15 miles in a storm to get here, he said quietly. You're brave enough. The week passed faster than she expected. And then, on the morning of the 7th day, Caleb came to the table with a clean shirt and his hat in his hand. You ready? He asked. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. Yes. They rode into Sonora together, Eliza on Dusty and Caleb on Sam. The town was small, barely more than a main street with a few buildings clustered around it. But it felt alive in a way she hadn't expected. People called out to Caleb as they passed, and he nodded back, his face giving nothing away. They stopped at a small office, and Caleb went inside to file the license. Eliza waited outside, her hands clenched in her lap. This was it. The last moment she could turn back, but she didn't want to turn back. Caleb came out, papers in hand. Tomorrow morning, he said. There's a preacher just outside town. He'll do it. Tomorrow, she echoed. Unless you... No, she said quickly. Tomorrow is fine. They rode back in silence, the sky wide and blue above them. And Eliza thought about the girl who'd stepped off the train in Philadelphia, angry and ashamed and certain her life was over. That girl felt like a stranger now. When they got back to the ranch, Caleb unsaddled the horses and sent her inside. Get some rest, he said. Big day tomorrow. But she didn't rest. She paced the small bedroom, her mind spinning. Tomorrow she'd marry a man she barely knew. Tomorrow her life would change in ways she couldn't predict. Tomorrow there'd be no going back. She thought about running, about saddling Dusty in the night and riding back to the crossing, back to the stagecoach, back to... Where? There was nothing to go back to. So she stayed. And the next morning, when Caleb knocked on her door and asked if she was ready, she said yes. The preacher's house sat at the edge of town, a weathered structure that looked like it had been built in a hurry and never properly finished. Eliza could see gaps between some of the boards, and the porch sagged on one side. But there were flowers in the window box, bright yellow things that looked determined to grow despite everything. And that felt like something. Caleb helped her down from Dusty, his hand steady at her elbow. She'd worn her best dress, the green one she'd packed at the bottom of her bag. It was wrinkled and the hem was still stained from the walk through the storm, but it was all she had. She'd tried to do something with her hair that morning, pinning it up in a way that felt formal, but strands kept escaping and now she just felt foolish. You look fine, Caleb said quietly, like he could read her thoughts. I look like I slept in a barn. You look like someone who's about to get married. He adjusted his hat, then took it off entirely. That's all that matters. The preacher who answered the door was younger than Eliza expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and ink stains on his fingers. He introduced himself as Reverend Mitchell and shook both their hands with genuine warmth. Come in, he said, stepping aside. My wife's just finishing up in the kitchen. She insisted on making something for after. I hope you don't mind. That's very kind, Eliza managed. The inside of the house was small but tidy, filled with books and papers. A woman appeared from the back room, wiping her hands on her apron. She was round-faced and smiling, with flour in her hair. You must be Miss Hartwell, she said. I'm Margaret. Oh, you're lovely. Caleb, you didn't tell us she was lovely. Caleb looked uncomfortable. Didn't seem relevant. Men, Margaret said to Eliza, shaking her head. No sense of occasion. Come here, dear. Let me fix that hair. Before Eliza could protest, Margaret had pulled out the remaining pins and was reworking her hair with quick, efficient fingers. There, much better. You've got beautiful hair, you know, dark as midnight. My own's gone gray already, and I'm not even 50. Margaret, the Reverend said gently, they didn't come here for hairdressing. I know that. I'm just saying. She stepped back, admiring her work. All right, you're ready. The ceremony itself was simple. They stood in the front room with the Reverend in front of them and Margaret as witness. Sunlight came through the window at an angle, illuminating dust motes in the air. Somewhere outside, a bird was singing. The Reverend opened a worn book and began to read. The words washed over Eliza, promises and vows and commitments that felt both enormous and strangely abstract. She tried to focus, but her mind kept skipping ahead to what came after, to the life she was stepping into. Caleb Turner, the Reverend said, do you take this woman to be your wife, to stand beside her in hardship and in hope, to build a life together with honesty and respect? I do, Caleb said. His voice was steady, no hesitation. Eliza Hartwell, do you take this man to be your husband, to stand beside him in hardship and in hope, to build a life together with honesty and respect? This was it, the last moment. She looked at Caleb, really looked at him. His face was serious, watchful. He wasn't trying to convince her of anything. He was just waiting for her answer. I do, she said. The Reverend smiled. Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. Caleb hesitated just for a second, then leaned in and pressed a brief, careful kiss to her lips. It was over almost before it began, but Eliza felt the warmth of it, the reality of it. Margaret clapped her hands. There! Now you're properly married. Come, I've made coffee and sweet rolls. You'll stay for a bit, won't you? They stayed. They sat at the small kitchen table and ate Margaret's rolls, which were good, and drank coffee that was too strong. Margaret did most of the talking, asking Eliza about Philadelphia and exclaiming over how far she'd traveled. The Reverend asked Caleb about the ranch, and Caleb gave short, factual answers that somehow conveyed more than longer explanations would have. When they finally left, Margaret hugged Eliza like they were old friends. You come visit me, she said. Promise. It gets lonely out here, and we women need to stick together. I promise, Eliza said, surprised to find she meant it. They rode back in the late morning light, the sky impossibly blue overhead. Eliza kept twisting the thin gold band on her finger, her mother's ring, the one she'd brought from Philadelphia. Caleb had slipped it on her finger during the ceremony, and now it sat there, familiar and strange at the same time. You all right? Caleb asked after a while. I think so, she said. Are you? Yeah. He glanced at her. Feels different now, doesn't it? Everything feels different. They rode in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just two people trying to figure out what came next. When they reached the ranch, Caleb dismounted and helped her down. I need to check the fence line in the south pasture, he said. Thought I'd take Sam and be back before dark. You'll be all right here? She nodded, oddly relieved to have some time alone. I'll be fine. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. There's beans in the larder if you get hungry, and bread from yesterday. Caleb, she said, stopping him before he could turn away. Thank you for today. You don't have to thank me. I know, but I am anyway. He almost smiled. Then he swung back up onto Sam and headed out, leaving her standing in the yard, watching him go. Eliza went inside and changed out of the green dress, folding it carefully and putting it away. She pulled on the simpler work dress she'd been wearing all week, then stood in the middle of the small house and tried to decide what to do with herself. She was married now. This was her home, her life. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt something else. Not quite peace, but maybe the beginning of it. She spent the afternoon cleaning. Not because the house was dirty, Caleb kept it neat, but because she needed something to do with her hands. She swept the floors, wiped down the table, reorganized the shelves in a way that made more sense to her. She found a crate of potatoes in the corner and sorted through them, pulling out the ones that were starting to rot. By the time Caleb returned, the sun was low and the house smelled like the stew she'd put together, beans and salt pork and the last of the carrots from the garden. He came in looking tired, dirt on his clothes and a rip in his sleeve. "Fence is fixed," he said, hanging his hat by the door. "Should hold for a while." He noticed the stew. "You didn't have to cook." "I wanted to." She ladled some into a bowl and set it on the table. "Sit." He sat, and they ate together, the way they had all week. But it felt different now, more permanent. "Fence give you trouble?" she asked. "Some. Post was rotted through. Had to replace it." He flexed his right hand, and she saw the raw scrape across his knuckles. "You should clean that." "It's fine." "Caleb." He looked up, surprised by the firmness in her voice. She stood and went to the shelf where he kept a tin of salve and a clean rag. When she came back, she took his hand without asking and started cleaning the wound. He tensed but didn't pull away. "You don't have to do this." "I know." She worked carefully, wiping away the dirt and dried blood. The scrape wasn't deep, but it looked painful. "Does it hurt?" "Not much." She glanced up at him. "You're a terrible liar." "Yeah, well." He watched her work, his expression unreadable. "Guess you'll figure that out." She finished cleaning the wound and applied the salve, then wrapped the rag around his hand. "There. Try not to ruin it tomorrow." "I'll do my best." He looked at his bandaged hand, then at her. "You're good at this." "My mother was sick for a long time before she died," Eliza said quietly. "I learned. I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." She sat back down across from him. "Tell me about the fence. Where is it?" He told her, and then somehow they were talking about the property, about his plans for expanding the herd, about the well he wanted to dig closer to the house. He talked more than she'd heard him talk before, his voice low and thoughtful, and she realized he'd been holding back all week, not trying to overwhelm her maybe, or just not sure how much she wanted to know. "I want to know all of it," she said when he paused. "I'm not going to break." He studied her. "No, I don't think you will." That night, after they'd cleaned up from supper, Caleb pulled out his bedroll like he had every night that week. "You're still sleeping out here?" Eliza asked. He paused. "Unless you want me to do something different." She felt her face heat. They hadn't talked about this, about what being married actually meant beyond the legal reality of it. "I just meant, the floor can't be comfortable. I've slept on worse." "Caleb, we're married now. I know that." He met her eyes. "But I'm not going to push you into anything you're not ready for. We've got time." She didn't know what to say to that. Part of her was relieved. Part of her felt something else, like he was being too careful with her, like she might shatter if he made the wrong move. "All right," she said finally, "but if you change your mind, I'll let you know." She went to bed alone again, but this time it felt different. This time she lay awake listening to him move around in the next room, hearing him settle onto the floor with a quiet exhale. This time, she was acutely aware that there was only a thin wooden door between them. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Caleb worked the ranch, and Eliza learned. She got better at milking Bess, though the cow still gave her trouble some mornings. She practiced riding Dusty until her thighs stopped aching quite so much. She started a new batch of bread and managed not to burn it this time. In the evenings, they ate together and talked. Small things, at first, then bigger things. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west with his father and watching the old man drink himself to death within 2 years. She told him about Philadelphia, about her father's shop and the slow decay of watching everything fall apart. "You ever miss it?" he asked one night. "The city?" "Yeah," she thought about it. "I miss knowing where everything is. I miss bookshops and theaters and being able to walk down a street without worrying about snakes. But no, I don't miss my life there." "What do you miss about it?" "Nothing," she said. "That's the point." He nodded slowly. "I miss Missouri sometimes. Not what it became, but what it was when I was a kid, before everything went bad." You ever think about going back? No, he said it flatly, with finality. Nothing there for me. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. The air was cooling, and somewhere in the distance a coyote started howling. Tell me about the herd, Eliza said. You keep mentioning expanding it, but I don't actually know what you have now. 12 head, he said. 6 cows, 2 bulls, 4 calves. I need at least 20 to make it worth running them to market. How long will that take? If I can keep them alive through the summer? Maybe 2 years? And if you can't, then I lose everything. She looked at him. You're gambling as much as I am. More, he said. You can always leave. I can't. I'm not leaving. You don't know that yet. Yes, I do. She said it with more certainty than she felt, but she needed him to hear it. I made a choice, Caleb. I'm staying. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. On the 5th day after the wedding, Eliza woke to the sound of shouting outside. She pulled on her dress and ran out to find Caleb at the fence, staring at something in the pasture. What happened? She called. One of the calves is down, he said, his voice tight. Looks like it got into something. She ran to the fence and saw it, a small brown calf lying on its side, legs twitching. Caleb was already climbing over the fence, moving fast. What can I do? Eliza shouted after him. Stay there, he called back. But she didn't stay. She climbed the fence, her skirt catching on the wood, and ran after him. By the time she reached him, he was kneeling beside the calf, his hands on its neck. Is it dying? She asked. I don't know. He ran his hands over the animal, checking for injuries. Could be poison. Could be a snake. I can't tell. What do we do? We wait. He sat back on his heels, his jaw tight. That's all we can do. They waited. The calf's breathing was labored, its eyes rolling. Eliza knelt in the dirt beside Caleb and put her hand on the animal's side, feeling the rapid rise and fall of its ribs. Come on, she whispered. Come on. The calf shuddered once, hard, and then went still. Caleb exhaled slowly, then stood. That's it then. Eliza stayed where she was, her hand still on the calf's side. I'm sorry. Not your fault. He looked out over the pasture, his face unreadable. I'll bury it this afternoon. They walked back to the house in silence. Caleb went straight to the barn without a word, and Eliza stood in the yard, feeling useless. She'd known this life would be hard. She'd expected work, exhaustion, discomfort, but she hadn't expected this, the sudden, arbitrary loss. The helplessness of watching something die and knowing there was nothing you could do to stop it. She went inside and made coffee, her hands shaking slightly. When Caleb came in an hour later, she handed him a cup without speaking. Thanks, he said. They sat at the table, not talking, until finally Eliza broke the silence. How often does that happen? Often enough. He stared into his cup. Last year I lost 3. Year before that, 5. And you just keep going? What else am I going to do? He looked up at her. This is the job. You lose some. You hope you don't lose too many. And you keep working. She thought about that. It's not fair. No, it's not. He drained his cup and stood. But fair doesn't matter out here. He went back outside and Eliza watched him go. Then she stood, rolled up her sleeves, and went out to help him dig. They dug the hole together in the far corner of the pasture where the ground was soft. It took hours. Eliza's hands blistered and her back screamed, but she kept working. Caleb didn't tell her to stop, didn't suggest she go back to the house. He just worked beside her, steady and methodical. When the hole was deep enough, they dragged the calf over and lowered it in. Caleb filled in the dirt without ceremony, and Eliza stood beside him, her dress filthy and her hair falling out of its pins. That's done, he said finally, tamping down the last of the dirt. They walked back to the house together, exhausted and quiet. Eliza's whole body hurt, but there was something else too, a strange sense of accomplishment. They'd lost something today, but they dealt with it, together. That night, after supper, Caleb finally broke the silence. You didn't have to help with that. I know, but you did anyway. We're partners, she said simply. Isn't that what you told me? He looked at her and something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. Yeah, that's what I told you. The next morning, Eliza woke to find Caleb already gone. She went outside and saw him at the fence, checking the other cattle. She made breakfast, and when he came in, they ate together without talking about the day before. But something had changed. She could feel it. They moved around each other with a new kind of ease, an understanding that hadn't been there before. Over the next week, Eliza threw herself into learning everything she could. She badgered Caleb with questions about the cattle, the land, the weather, the market. She practiced roping fence posts until her hands were raw. She learned to read the sky for rain, to check the water level in the creek, to recognize the signs of a sick animal. And Caleb taught her. Not patiently, exactly. He wasn't built for patience, but thoroughly. He showed her things once, expected her to remember, and corrected her when she got it wrong without making her feel small. One afternoon, he took her out to check the fence line. They rode together, Eliza on Dusty and Caleb on Sam, moving slowly through the pasture. He pointed out where the boundaries were, where the creek flooded in spring, where he'd found mountain lion tracks last year. "You see that ridge?" he said, pointing to a low rise in the distance. "That's where the wind comes from in winter. Anything on this side of it gets hit hard. You'll need to bring the cattle in closer when the storms start." "How will I know when the storms are coming?" "You'll feel it." He glanced at her. "The air changes, gets heavy, and the animals know. They'll start moving on their own." She filed that away, adding it to the growing list of things she needed to remember. They stopped at the top of the ridge, and Caleb dismounted to check a section of fence. Eliza stayed on Dusty, looking out over the land. From here, she could see the ranch house in the distance, small and lonely against the endless sky. Beyond it, there was nothing but open country stretching to the horizon. It should have felt empty. Instead, it felt like possibility. "You're smiling," Caleb said, glancing up at her. "Am I?" "Yeah." He straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. "What's funny?" "Nothing's funny," she said. "I was just thinking, I like it here." He looked surprised. "You do? Is that strange?" "I don't know. Most people think it's too harsh." "It is harsh," she said, "but it's honest. You know where you stand." He considered that, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess that's true." They rode back as the sun started to sink, the sky turning gold and orange. Eliza's body ached from the saddle, but it was a good ache, an earned ache. When they got back, Caleb unsaddled the horses and sent her inside to wash up. She pumped water into the basin and scrubbed the dust from her face and hands, then started on supper. She'd gotten better at cooking over the past 2 weeks. Not good, exactly, but competent. Tonight she made stew again, with potatoes and onions and the last of the dried beef. Caleb came in as she was setting the table. He'd washed up at the pump outside, and his hair was still damp. "Smells good," he said. "Don't get your hopes up." But it was good, or good enough. They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward Caleb pulled out a piece of paper and a stubby pencil. "What's that?" Eliza asked. "Inventory," he said. "I need to know what we have before I can figure out what we need." "I can help with that." He glanced up at her. "You any good with numbers?" "Better than you, probably." He handed her the pencil. "All right, let's see." They worked together for the next hour, Caleb calling out what he knew, and Eliza writing it down in neat columns. Cattle, chickens, feed, tools, supplies. She organized it in a way that made sense, adding notes about what was running low and what needed replacing. When they finished, Caleb looked at the paper and shook his head. "That's better than anything I could have done." "That's because you were trying to keep it all in your head," she said. "You need to write things down." "I know." He folded the paper carefully. "I just never had anyone to help before." She looked at him. This man who'd taken a chance on a stranger, who worked himself to exhaustion every day, who didn't know how to ask for help but was learning. And she felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. That night, after Caleb had laid out his bedroll, Eliza stood in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at him. "You don't have to sleep on the floor," she said quietly. He went very still. "Eliza, I'm just saying the bed is big enough for both of us. And you're my husband, and the floor can't be good for your back." He stood slowly, his eyes searching her face. "You sure?" "No," she admitted. "But I think we should try anyway. He picked up his blanket and followed her into the bedroom. They lay down on opposite sides of the bed, a careful distance between them, both staring at the ceiling. "This is awkward," Eliza said after a minute. "Yeah, but it's better than the floor." "Yeah," he said again, and she heard the hint of a smile in his voice. They fell asleep like that, not touching, but together. And when Eliza woke in the middle of the night to find Caleb's hand resting near hers, she didn't pull away. The next morning brought trouble. Eliza woke to the sound of men's voices outside, loud, aggressive. She sat up quickly, and Caleb was already out of bed, pulling on his boots. "Stay inside," he said, his voice tight. "What's happening?" "I don't know yet. Just stay inside." But she followed him to the door and looked out. 3 men on horseback sat in the yard, and even from a distance she could see they weren't friendly. The one in front was big, with a thick beard and a gun on his hip. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, and Eliza stood just inside the doorway, watching. "Morning, Turner," the bearded man said. His voice was mockingly cheerful. "Heard you got yourself hitched. Thought we'd come by and congratulate you." "What do you want, Brennan?" Caleb's voice was flat. "Just being neighborly." Brennan grinned, but there was no warmth in it. "That's a nice piece of land you've got here. Shame it's so small. Man could do a lot more with it if he had some help." "I don't need help." "You sure about that?" Brennan gestured toward the pasture. "I heard you lost a calf last week. That's rough. Keep losing stock like that. You won't make it through the year. I'll manage." "See, that's the thing." Brennan leaned forward in his saddle. "I've been thinking about expanding, and your land sits right in the middle of where I want to go. So I'm prepared to make you an offer, fair price, more than you'd get if you waited until you went under." "I'm not selling." "Think about it, Turner. You've got a wife now. You want to drag her down with you when this place fails?" Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "Get off my property." "Now that's not very friendly." Brennan's smile disappeared. "I'm trying to do you a favor here." "I said get off my property." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Brennan straightened in his saddle and shrugged. "Suit yourself. But when you change your mind, and you will, the offer won't be as good." He turned his horse and rode out, the other 2 men following. They didn't hurry, making their point clear. Caleb stood on the porch until they were out of sight, his shoulders rigid. Then he turned and saw Eliza standing in the doorway. "I told you to stay inside," he said. "Who was that?" "Ray Brennan. He owns the ranch to the east. Big operation. He wants to buy you out." "He wants to take the land," Caleb corrected. "Buying is just the polite way of doing it. And if you don't sell? Then he'll make it harder for me to succeed." Caleb moved past her into the house. "He's done it before, to other small ranchers. Runs his cattle onto their land, messes with their water supply, makes life difficult until they give up. That's how it works out here." He grabbed his hat from the peg. "I need to check the herd. Make sure he didn't do anything while he was circling. I'll come with you." "Eliza..." "I'm coming with you." He looked at her, then nodded. "All right, saddle up." They rode out together, checking every head of cattle, every section of fence. Everything looked fine, but Caleb's tension didn't ease. "He'll be back," he said as they headed home. "Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but he'll be back." "What are you going to do?" "Same thing I've been doing. Work harder. Hope it's enough." That night, Eliza lay awake long after Caleb had fallen asleep beside her. She thought about Brennan's offer, about the casual cruelty in his voice. She thought about the calf they'd buried, about all the things that could go wrong. And she thought about Caleb, who refused to give up even when the odds were stacked against him. She understood now why he'd needed a partner, not just for the work, but for this. Someone to stand beside him when men like Brennan came calling. Someone to prove he wasn't alone. She reached out in the darkness and found his hand. His fingers closed around hers automatically, even in sleep. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Texas, Eliza felt certain she'd made the right choice. The days after Brennan's visit settled into a harder rhythm. Caleb worked from before dawn until well past dark, checking fence lines he'd already checked, counting cattle he'd already counted. Eliza watched him wear himself down and didn't know how to stop it. "You need to eat," she said one evening when he came in late again, his face drawn with exhaustion. "I will." He hung his hat and moved toward the basin to wash up. "I mean now, not later. You're going to collapse." "I'm fine." "You're not fine." She put her hands on her hips. You barely slept last night. You were up twice checking on things that didn't need checking. He turned to face her, and she saw the tension in his shoulders. Brennan's waiting for me to make a mistake. I can't give him one. So you're going to work yourself to death instead? If that's what it takes. That's not what it takes, she said, her voice rising. That's just you being stubborn. Maybe I am stubborn. But this ranch is all I've got, Eliza. I lose this. I've got nothing. You've got me. The words hung between them, and Caleb went very still. Then he crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. He held her tight, his face buried in her hair, and she felt him shaking. I know, he said quietly. I know I do. But I need this to work. I need to prove I can do it. You don't have to prove anything to him. I'm not trying to prove it to him. I'm trying to prove it to myself. She wrapped her arms around him and held on. They stood like that for a long time, neither one speaking, until finally Caleb pulled back and looked at her. I'll eat, he said, and I'll try to sleep. But I can't promise I'll stop worrying. I'm not asking you to stop worrying. I'm asking you not to kill yourself. He managed a tired smile. Deal. They ate supper together, and for the first time in days, Caleb actually seemed present. He asked her about the chickens, which had started laying again, and listened while she told him about the garden plot she wanted to start once the weather warmed up properly. You think we can spare the water for it? She asked. If we're smart about it. He pushed his empty plate away. What are you thinking of planting? Vegetables, mostly. Beans, squash, maybe some tomatoes. Things we can put up for winter. That's good thinking. He leaned back in his chair. You keep surprising me. Why? I don't know. I guess I thought you'd have a harder time adjusting. I did have a hard time adjusting, she said. I'm still having a hard time, but I'm not going to sit around feeling sorry for myself when there's work to be done. He looked at her with something like admiration. You're tougher than you look. I'd have to be, wouldn't I? To marry a man I'd never met and move to the middle of nowhere. Fair point. He stood and started clearing the table. Come on, I'll help you with the dishes, and then we're both going to bed at a reasonable hour. You're actually going to sleep? I'm going to try. They cleaned up together, moving around each other in the small space with an ease that was becoming familiar. When they finished, Caleb banked the fire and they went to bed. He fell asleep almost immediately, his breathing evening out, and Eliza lay beside him listening to the wind outside. She thought about what he'd said, about needing to prove something to himself. She understood that. She'd come here for the same reason, hadn't she? To prove she could be more than her father's disappointed daughter. To prove she could build something that mattered. She reached over and took his hand, and even in sleep his fingers closed around hers. The next morning brought the kind of clear, bright weather that made everything feel possible. Eliza woke to find Caleb already up, but for once he wasn't rushing out the door. He was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, looking almost relaxed. Morning, he said when she emerged from the bedroom. You slept. I did. He poured her coffee from the pot. Feel better too. Good. She sat down across from him. What's the plan for today? I need to ride into town. We're low on salt and a few other things. Thought you might want to come along. Really? Unless you'd rather stay here. No, I'll come. She tried not to sound too eager, but the truth was she'd been feeling isolated. The ranch was beautiful in its way, but it was also lonely. The thought of seeing other people, even briefly, was appealing. They set out after breakfast, riding side by side on the road to Sonora. The landscape looked different in the morning light, softer, less harsh. Eliza found herself relaxing into the ride, enjoying the movement and the open sky. You're getting better at this, Caleb said, nodding at the way she sat in the saddle. I'm trying. Dusty helps. She's patient with me. She's a good horse. He glanced at her. You two make a good pair. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and then Caleb spoke again. When we get to town, there's someone I want you to meet. Who? John Mackey. He runs the feed store. Good man. If we ever need help, he's someone we can count on. Is he a friend? As close as I've got to one out here. Caleb adjusted his hat. He stood up to Brennan once, a few years back. Brennan tried to bully him into selling his store. John told him to go to hell. What happened? Brennan backed down. John's too well liked in town. Going after him would have turned the whole community against Brennan, and even he's not stupid enough to do that. so there are limits to what Brennan can get away with. Some, Caleb said, but he's smart about picking his targets. He goes after the ones who are already struggling, the ones nobody will miss too much. Like you, like me. He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. But that's why I need to make this work. Prove I'm not going anywhere. When they reached Sonora, the town was busier than Eliza had seen it before. Wagons lined the main street, and people moved in and out of the shops with purpose. Caleb led them to a sturdy building near the center of town with a sign that read Mackey's Feed and Supply. Inside, the store was organized chaos. Sacks of grain stacked against the walls, tools hanging from the ceiling, barrels of nails and other hardware scattered throughout. A man stood behind the counter, tall and broad-shouldered with graying hair and a weathered face that broke into a smile when he saw Caleb. "Turner," he called. "About time you showed your face. I was starting to think you'd died out there." "Not yet." Caleb shook his hand. "John, this is my wife Eliza. Eliza, John Mackey." John's eyebrows shot up. "Wife? You actually went through with it?" "I did." John turned to Eliza and shook her hand with genuine warmth. "Well, I'll be damned. Welcome to Texas, Mrs. Turner. You must be either very brave or very crazy to marry this stubborn bastard." "Probably both," Eliza said, and John laughed. "I like her already." He gestured around the store. "What do you need?" "Salt, flour, coffee if you've got it. And I need to settle up my account." John waved a hand. "We'll get to that. Let me get your supplies together." He started moving around the store, pulling items from shelves. "How's the ranch holding up?" "Good enough," Caleb said. "Lost a calf a couple weeks back, but the rest are healthy." "I heard Brennan paid you a visit." Caleb's expression tightened. "Word travels fast." "It does when Brennan's involved. He tell you the same story he tells everyone?" "About wanting to expand? Yeah." John set a bag of flour on the counter with a heavy thud. "Man's got more land than he knows what to do with already. It's not about the land, it's about control." "I know that. Just making sure." John looked at Eliza. "Your husband's got a good head on his shoulders, Mrs. Turner. He'll figure out how to deal with Brennan. Just might take some time. Please, call me Eliza." "Eliza, then." He went back to gathering supplies. "How are you finding ranch life? Not what you expected, I imagine." "It's harder than I thought," she admitted, "but I'm learning." "That's the right attitude. This land doesn't care what you expected, it just cares what you do." He set the last of the supplies on the counter. "That's everything on your list. You need anything else?" Caleb pulled out a few coins. "This should cover it." John counted it quickly, then pushed half of it back. "Keep it. Consider it a wedding present." "John, I can pay a—" "I know you can. I'm choosing not to take it all." John's voice was firm. "You've got a wife to think about now. Put it towards something useful." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but he pocketed the coins. "Thank you." "Don't mention it." John loaded the supplies into a crate and helped Caleb carry it outside. As they were securing it to Sam's saddle, he turned to Eliza. "You ever need anything, and I mean anything, you come see me. Don't wait for Caleb to ask, just come." "I will," she said. "Thank you." They rode out of town with the supplies, and Eliza felt lighter than she had in days. It wasn't just the successful trip, it was knowing that Caleb had friends here, that they weren't as alone as she'd feared. "John's a good man," she said as they rode. "Best I know." "How long have you known him?" "Since I first came out here. He gave me credit when nobody else would. Helped me get started." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "He's one of the reasons I'm still here." They rode in silence after that, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that came from being with someone who didn't need constant conversation to feel at ease. When they got back to the ranch, Caleb unloaded the supplies while Eliza started on supper. They just sat down to eat when they heard it, a low, angry bellow from the direction of the pasture. Caleb was on his feet instantly. "That's one of the bulls." They ran outside together, and even in the fading light, Eliza could see the problem. One of the bulls was in the pen with the milk cow, snorting and pawing at the ground. And beyond him, the fence had a gap in it where the posts had given way. "How did he—" Eliza started. "Doesn't matter." Caleb was already moving. "I need to get him out before he hurts Bess." "What do I do?" "Get a rope from the barn and stay back." Eliza ran to the barn, her heart hammering. She grabbed the first rope she saw and ran back to find Caleb in the pen, trying to maneuver the bull toward the gap in the fence. The animal was agitated, tossing its head, and Caleb had to keep dodging to avoid the horns. "Caleb, be careful." "I've got it," he said, not taking his eyes off the bull. "Just be ready with that rope if I need it." He moved slowly, deliberately, making himself bigger and using his body to guide the bull toward the opening. For a moment, it looked like it was working. Then the bull charged. Caleb tried to get out of the way, but his boot caught on something and he went down hard. The bull's horn caught him in the side and Eliza heard herself scream. The bull kept going, out through the gap and into the main pasture. Eliza didn't care. She was already running to Caleb, who was on his hands and knees, one arm pressed to his side. "How bad is it?" she asked, dropping down beside him. "I'm all right," he said through gritted teeth. "Let me see." "Eliza, let me see." He moved his hand, and even in the dim light, she could see the dark stain spreading across his shirt. A lot of blood. "We need to get you inside," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just need a minute." "You don't have a minute. You're bleeding." She got her shoulder under his arm and helped him stand. He was heavy, and she could feel him shaking. "Come on, lean on me." They made it to the house, barely. Eliza got him to the table and pulled his shirt up to look at the wound. It was a long gash across his ribs, deep and bleeding freely. Her stomach turned, but she pushed the feeling down. "I need clean cloths," she said, "and whiskey if you have any." "Cabinet," Caleb said, his voice tight. "Behind the flower." She found the bottle and grabbed every clean rag she could find. When she came back, Caleb was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "I know." She poured whiskey directly into the wound, and Caleb's whole body went rigid. He didn't make a sound, but his knuckles went white where he gripped the edge of the table. "I'm sorry," she said, pressing a cloth to the wound to slow the bleeding. "I'm so sorry." "Not your fault. We need to get you to a doctor." "Nearest doctor is 2 days' ride. I'll be dead before we get there if it's that bad. And if it's not, the trip will kill me anyway." He opened his eyes and looked at her. "You're going to have to stitch it." "I can't." "You can. I've seen you sew. Your hands are steady." "Caleb, this isn't a tear in a shirt." "I know what it is." His voice was firm, despite the pain. "But there's nobody else. It's you or nothing." She stared at him, her mind racing. She'd watched her mother's doctor work once, years ago. She'd sewn up a cut on her own hand when she was 16, but this was different. "Where's your sewing kit?" she asked. "In the trunk. Use the thinnest needle you can find. And thread. Use the silk thread if there is any." She found the kit and brought it to the table with shaking hands. Caleb poured himself a measure of whiskey and drank it straight, then handed her the bottle. "You might need it more than me," he said. "I need my hands steady." "Then just do it fast. Don't think about it too much." She threaded the needle on the third try, her fingers clumsy. Then she took a deep breath and looked at the wound. It had stopped bleeding as heavily, but it was still ugly, ragged edges, muscle visible beneath. "Tell me if I'm hurting you too much," she said. "Just do it." She pressed the edges of the wound together with one hand and pushed the needle through with the other. Caleb sucked in a breath but didn't move. She pulled the thread through and made the first stitch, then the second. Her hand steadied as she worked, falling into a rhythm. In through one side, out through the other, pull tight, tie off. Over and over. Caleb's breathing was harsh, and she could see the muscles in his jaw working, but he stayed still, letting her work. "Almost done," she murmured. "Just a few more." When she tied off the last stitch, her hands were covered in his blood, and she was shaking all over. She sat back and looked at what she'd done. The stitches were uneven, probably too tight in places, but they were holding. The wound was closed. "There," she said. "I don't know if it's right, but it's the best I can do." Caleb looked down at his side and nodded slowly. "It's good. Better than I could have done. We need to wrap it." She grabbed more clean cloths and wound them around his torso, trying not to think about how much blood he'd lost. When she finished, she helped him to his feet. "Can you make it to the bed?" she asked. "Yeah." But he swayed as he stood, and she caught him. "Maybe just sit for a minute." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You just got gored by a bull." He laughed weakly. "When you put it like that." He let her guide him to the bedroom and lower him onto the bed. He lay back with a groan, his eyes closing. "Don't fall asleep yet," Eliza said. "I need to know you're all right." "I'm tired." "I know, but just talk to me for a minute. Tell me how you feel." "Like I got gored by a bull." He opened his eyes and looked at her. "You did good, Eliza. I know that wasn't easy. I thought I was going to kill you. You didn't. You saved me." He reached for her hand. "Come here." She sat on the edge of the bed, and he pulled her down beside him. "Lie with me for a while." "You should rest." "I will, but I want you here." She stretched out beside him, careful not to jostle him. His arm came around her, and she pressed her face against his shoulder. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I know, me too." "You were?" "Hell yes, that bull could have done a lot worse." They lay together in the dimness, and gradually Caleb's breathing evened out. Eliza stayed awake, listening to him breathe, terrified that if she fell asleep she'd wake up to find him dead. But eventually, exhaustion won. She drifted off with her hand on his chest, feeling it rise and fall. When she woke, it was still dark. For a panicked moment, she couldn't remember where she was or what had happened. Then she felt Caleb beside her, warm and breathing, and it all came back. She sat up carefully and checked the bandage. There was some blood seeping through, but not much. His forehead was warm when she touched it, but not feverish. He stirred at her touch. "What time is it?" "Middle of the night. How do you feel?" "Sore." He shifted, wincing, but alive. "Don't move too much. You'll tear the stitches." "Yes, ma'am." He caught her hand. "Thank you. For what you did." "I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. You could have panicked. You could have frozen. But you didn't." He squeezed her hand. "You're stronger than you think." "I don't feel strong. Nobody does. That's the secret." He closed his eyes again. "Go back to sleep. I'm not going anywhere." She lay back down beside him, and this time she let herself relax. He was here. He was alive. Everything else they could figure out in the morning. Over the next few days, Eliza learned what it meant to run a ranch alone. Caleb couldn't move without pain, couldn't lift anything heavier than a cup of water. So she did everything. She fed the chickens and collected the eggs. She milked Bess, who seemed to sense something was wrong and behaved better than usual. She hauled water from the creek and chopped wood for the stove. She checked on the cattle, counting them twice to make sure none had wandered off. She mended the gap in the fence with planks and nails and pure determination. And every few hours she checked on Caleb. She changed his bandages, cleaned the wound, made him eat even when he said he wasn't hungry. She watched for signs of infection, fever, red streaks, swelling. So far there were none. On the third day, Caleb tried to get up. "What are you doing?" Eliza asked, coming in to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed. "I need to check the herd." "No, you don't. I already checked them this morning." "Eliza, I counted 12 head, 6 cows, 2 bulls, 4 calves. They're all there, they're all healthy, and the fence is fixed." He stared at her. "You fixed the fence?" "Of course I did. What did you think I was going to do? Leave it?" I don't know what I thought." He ran a hand through his hair. "You've been doing all this yourself?" "Someone had to." "You should have asked for help, ridden into town, gotten John—" "And left you here alone? Not a chance." She crossed her arms. "Besides, I can handle it." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Yeah, I can see that. Now get back in bed before you tear those stitches and I have to do it all over again." "I'll just sit. I'm going crazy lying down all day." "Fine, sit. But if you try to go outside, I'm locking you in here." "You wouldn't. Try me." He smiled despite himself. "All right, I'll sit." She made him coffee and brought it to him, then went back to her work. When she came in at midday with lunch, she found him at the table with the inventory sheet she'd made weeks ago, adding notes in his rough handwriting. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Trying to make myself useful. I figured I could at least work on the numbers while you're doing everything else." "You should be resting." "I've been resting for 3 days." "I'm fine." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit with me for a minute. Tell me what needs doing." She sat, and they went through the list together. He asked her about each task she'd completed, and she could see him reassessing her with every answer, not with surprise exactly, but with something deeper. Respect, maybe. Recognition. I couldn't have done better myself, he said finally. Don't sound so shocked.
I'm not shocked. I'm impressed. He set down the pencil and looked at her. I knew you were smart. I knew you were determined, but I didn't know you could do all this. Neither did I, she admitted. But I didn't have a choice, did I? You always have a choice, he said, echoing his earlier words. You chose to stay. You chose to fight for this place. That means something. She felt her throat tighten. I wasn't going to let you die and lose the ranch in the same week. Still. He reached across the table and took her hand. Thank you. They sat together in the quiet afternoon light, and Eliza felt something settle into place. This was her home now. Not just legally, not just because she'd married Caleb, but because she'd fought for it. She'd bled for it in her own way. She'd proven she belonged here. By the end of the week, Caleb was moving around more easily, though Eliza still watched him like a hawk for signs of trouble. The wound was healing cleanly, her uneven stitches holding. It would scar, but it would heal. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Caleb turned to her. I've been thinking about what happens next. What do you mean? With Brennan, he's not going to stop, and now that I'm hurt, he might see it as an opportunity. Then we'll deal with it. We? Of course we. She looked at him. You think I'm going to let you face him alone? I think I don't want you in the middle of this. I'm already in the middle of it. I'm your wife. This ranch is as much mine as it is yours now. That's not... He stopped himself. You're right. It is yours too. So we figure it out together. She took his hand. Whatever he does, we'll handle it. Together. He studied her face in the fading light, then nodded. Together. They sat in silence after that, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to black. And when they went inside, when they lay down together in the dark, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt since leaving Philadelphia. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 2 weeks after the goring, Caleb was back to full work, though Eliza still caught him favoring his left side when he thought she wasn't looking. The scar was an angry red line across his ribs, and she made him let her check it every few days to make sure it was still healing clean. You're worse than a mother hen, he grumbled one morning as she inspected the wound. And you're worse than a stubborn mule, she shot back. Hold still. It's fine, Eliza. It will stay fine if you let me take care of it. She pressed gently around the edges of the scar, checking for heat or swelling. Finding none, she stepped back. All right, you're good. Can I get dressed now? Please do. He pulled his shirt on with a slight wince that he tried to hide. I need to ride out to the south pasture today. Check on the water situation. Creek's running lower than it should be this time of year. I'll come with you. You don't have to... I want to see it for myself. If there's a problem with the water, I should know about it. She tied her hair back with a strip of cloth. Besides, you're not supposed to be lifting anything heavy yet. If there's work to be done, you'll need help. He looked like he wanted to argue, then thought better of it. All right, we'll go together. They saddled up and rode out under a sky that was too blue, too clear. No rain in sight, and that worried Eliza more than she wanted to admit. She'd learned enough in the past months to know that water was everything out here. Without it, the cattle would die. The garden would die. They would be forced to sell or abandon the place. When they reached the creek that fed the south pasture, Eliza saw the problem immediately. What should have been a steady flow was barely a trickle, the exposed rocks bone dry and cracked. Caleb dismounted and walked along the creek bed, his face grim. This isn't right. Even in a dry spell, it shouldn't be this low. Could it be blocked upstream? Maybe. He knelt and put his hand in the shallow water, then stood and looked toward the east. Or someone's diverting it. Eliza felt her stomach drop. Brennan. I don't know for sure, but his land is upstream from here. Caleb's jaw tightened. I need to ride up and check. Then we both go. Eliza, if I'm right, then you'll need a witness. She dismounted and stood beside him. I'm not letting you confront him alone. They followed the creek upstream for over an hour, watching the water get shallower and shallower until it disappeared entirely into the dry earth. Just beyond the point where it vanished, they found what they were looking for. Someone had built a crude dam across the creek,
diverting the water into a new channel that led east, straight toward Brennan's property. The construction was recent, the earth still dark and loose. Caleb sat on Sam for a long moment, staring at the dam. His hands were tight on the reins, and Eliza could see the anger building in him. "He can't do this," she said quietly. "He just did." Caleb's voice was flat, controlled. "Question is what I'm going to do about it. We could tear it down, and he'd just build it again, or worse." He turned Sam around. "No, I need to talk to him first. Try to handle this without it getting ugly." "You think he'll listen?" "Probably not, but I have to try." They rode to Brennan's ranch in tense silence. The place was enormous compared to theirs, a sprawling house, multiple barns, corrals filled with horses and cattle. Everything about it screamed money and power, and Eliza felt small looking at it. Brennan himself was in one of the corrals, watching two of his men work a young horse. He saw them coming and walked over to the fence, a smile already forming on his face. "Turner," he called out. "Didn't expect to see you up and around so soon. Heard you had an accident." "Word travels fast," Caleb said evenly. "It does." Brennan's eyes flicked to Eliza. "Mrs. Turner, looking well." She didn't respond, just met his gaze steadily. Caleb dismounted and Eliza followed his lead. "We need to talk about the creek," Caleb said. "What about it?" "You know what about it? The dam, the diversion." Brennan's smile didn't waver. "Oh, that. Yes, I had my boys do some work on my water supply. Been having some issues with flow." "That's not your water to divert. It runs through my land." "Actually, the source is on my property. I'm just making better use of it." Brennan leaned against the fence, perfectly relaxed. "You got a problem with that. Take it up with the territorial office. File a claim. You know that would take months, maybe years. My cattle will be dead by then. That's unfortunate." Brennan's tone was sympathetic, but his eyes were cold. "Tell you what, though. My offer still stands. I'd be willing to take that property off your hands. Even with the water situation, I'd give you a fair price." "I'm not selling." "Then I guess you've got a problem." Brennan straightened. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got work to do." "You can't just steal my water." "I'm not stealing anything. I'm using resources on my own land. If that affects your operation, well, that's the risk of ranching." Brennan turned away. "You two have a safe ride home." Caleb stood there for a moment, his fists clenched. Eliza put a hand on his arm. "Let's go." "Eliza." "Let's go," she repeated more firmly. "This isn't the place." He let her pull him back to the horses, and they rode away from Brennan's ranch in silence. Eliza could feel the rage coming off Caleb in waves, and she knew he was barely holding it together. When they were out of sight of the ranch, Caleb pulled Sam to a stop and dismounted. He paced in a tight circle, his hands running through his hair. "That son of a bitch," he said. "He planned this. He waited until I was hurt, and then he made his move. We'll figure it out." "Figure what out?" "He's right about the claim process. By the time it gets resolved, I'll have lost everything." He kicked at the dirt. "This is exactly what he does. He finds a legal way to destroy you, and then he offers to buy you out for pennies. Then we don't wait for the legal process. We tear down the dam. And then what? He builds it again, or he comes after us for destruction of his property." Caleb shook his head. "There's no winning this, Eliza. There has to be something." "There isn't." His voice rose, and she saw the desperation in his eyes. "Don't you get it? He's got more money, more men, more influence. He can afford to wait me out. I can't." She stepped closer to him. "So what are you saying? You're just going to give up?" "I don't know what I'm saying." He turned away from her. "Maybe I should take his offer, get what I can, and start over somewhere else." "You don't mean that, don't I?" He faced her again. "What's the point of fighting if I'm going to lose anyway? At least if I sell, I'll have something. I can find another piece of land somewhere Brennan doesn't have his claws in. And what about me?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "What about what I've put into this place?" "You'd come with me." "That's not the point." She felt anger rising in her chest. "I didn't come all this way, didn't learn everything I've learned, didn't stitch you back together with my own hands, just to run away the first time things get hard. This isn't just hard, Eliza. This is impossible." "Nothing's impossible." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "You told me you needed to prove you could do this, that you needed to prove it to yourself. Was that just talk? That was before... Before what? Before it got difficult? She shook her head. I left everything I knew to come here. I married a stranger. I learned to rope and ride and milk a damn cow. I fixed fences and hauled water and kept this ranch running when you couldn't. And I didn't do all that so you could quit the first time someone pushes back. He stared at her, something shifting in his expression. You really want to fight this? I really want to fight this. It could get ugly. Brennan's not going to just let us tear down his dam without consequences. Then let it get ugly. She met his eyes. I'm not afraid of him. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. All right, we fight. They rode back to their ranch and spent the evening planning. Caleb knew the law well enough to know they'd need documentation, evidence that the water had been diverted, proof of when it happened, a record of how it affected their cattle. Eliza wrote everything down in careful detail, noting dates and observations. We'll need witnesses too, Caleb said. People who can testify that the creek ran full before Brennan dammed it. Who would do that? Everyone around here is either scared of Brennan or working for him. Not everyone. Caleb stood and grabbed his hat. I'm going to talk to John. Now? It's almost dark. Can't wait. If we're going to do this, we need to move fast. He paused at the door. You'll be all right here? I'll be fine. Go. He rode out, and Eliza sat alone in the house, looking at the pages of notes spread across the table. This was insane. They were going up against a man who had every advantage, who could crush them without breaking a sweat. But the alternative, giving up, walking away, felt worse. She thought about her father, about how he'd let his problems defeat him, how he'd gambled and drunk and made excuses until there was nothing left. She'd promised herself she wouldn't be like that. She'd promised herself she'd fight. Caleb returned after midnight, looking tired but slightly less defeated. John's in, he said. He'll testify about the creek. Said he's been fishing that stretch for years, knows how it should run. That's good. It's a start. He sat down heavily. He's also going to talk to some of the other small ranchers, see if anyone else has had problems with Brennan. You think they'll help? Maybe. If enough of us band together, we might have a chance. He rubbed his face. John also said we should talk to the territorial representative when he comes through next month. Get it on record officially. Next month, Caleb, we don't have that long. I know, but we need to play this smart. If we just tear down the dam without going through proper channels, Brennan can claim we're the ones breaking the law. Eliza wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. So what do we do in the meantime? We haul water, every day. As much as we can carry. He looked at her. It's going to be brutal. I don't care. And it was brutal. For the next 3 weeks, they hauled water from town in barrels strapped to a wagon, making the trip every other day. It was backbreaking work, loading the barrels, driving the wagon over rough roads, unloading at the ranch. They'd fill the trough for the cattle, water the garden, and barely have enough left over for themselves. Eliza's hands developed new blisters, then calluses on top of the calluses. Her back ached constantly. She lost weight she didn't have to lose. But she kept working. Caleb pushed himself even harder, and Eliza watched him worry. She could see it in the way he stared at the cattle, counting and recounting them like the numbers might change, in the way he walked the fence lines obsessively, checking for breaks, in the way he barely slept, getting up 2 or 3 times a night to look out at the pasture. You're going to make yourself sick, she said one night, finding him at the window again. Can't sleep, because you won't let yourself. She came to stand beside him. We're doing everything we can. It might not be enough. It has to be enough. She took his hand. Come back to bed. He let her pull him away from the window, but she could feel the tension in him. When they lay down, he pulled her close, his face in her hair. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For what? For dragging you into this. You didn't sign up for this kind of fight. I signed up for whatever came. She turned to face him in the darkness. I meant what I said in those letters. I wanted a partnership. This is what partnership looks like. Even when it's this hard, especially when it's this hard. He kissed her then, soft and desperate, and she kissed him back. They'd been careful with each other up until now, still learning the boundaries of this marriage. But tonight, something shifted. They came together with an urgency that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with needing to hold on to something good in the middle of everything falling apart. Afterward, they lay tangled together, their breathing slowly evening out.
I love you, Caleb said suddenly. I don't know when it happened, but I do. Eliza felt her chest tighten. I love you too. Yeah? Yeah. She pressed closer to him. We're going to be all right. I know we are. How do you know? Because we're not doing this alone anymore. We've got each other. He held her tighter, and they fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other against whatever came next. The territorial representative arrived in Sonora on a Tuesday. His name was Samuel Porter, and he was a thin, serious man with spectacles and a leather satchel full of papers. Caleb and Eliza met him at the Reverend's house, along with John and 3 other ranchers who'd agreed to speak up about Brennan's practices. Porter listened to their stories with increasing interest, taking careful notes. When they finished, he sat back and looked at them over his spectacles. This is a serious allegation, he said. Water rights disputes can take years to resolve. We don't have years, Caleb said. We have maybe a month before we start losing cattle. I understand the urgency, but the law moves at its own pace. Porter tapped his pencil against his notes. However, there may be something I can do in the interim. I can issue a temporary injunction preventing any party from altering water flow until a proper survey can be conducted. How long would that take? The injunction? I can have it drawn up and filed within the week. The survey, he shrugged. 2 months, possibly 3. And Brennan would have to comply with the injunction? In theory, yes. In practice, enforcement can be difficult this far from the territorial capital. Porter looked at Caleb directly. But it would give you legal standing. If he violates the injunction, he'd be in contempt. That carries real consequences. Caleb glanced at Eliza, and she nodded. Do it, he said. Porter pulled out papers and had each of them sign statements. When he finished, he packed everything back into his satchel. I'll file this as soon as I return to the capital. You should receive notice within 10 days. Thank you, Caleb said. Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning of what will likely be a long legal battle. Porter stood and shook hands with each of them. But for what it's worth, I hope you win. Men like Brennan think they can buy their way around the law. It's good to see people standing up to that. They left the meeting with a fragile hope. It wasn't much, just a piece of paper that might or might not be enforced, but it was something. You think Brennan will comply? Eliza asked as they rode home. Not willingly, but if he doesn't, he'll be on the wrong side of the law. Even Brennan has to care about that. Does he? Caleb was quiet for a moment. I don't know. I guess we'll find out. The injunction arrived exactly 10 days later, delivered by a territorial marshal who rode out to both ranches. Caleb and Eliza watched him arrive, a tall man with a badge and a rifle, and felt a surge of vindication. Mr. Turner? The marshal asked. That's me. I have an order from Representative Porter regarding water rights dispute between yourself and Raymond Brennan. He handed over an official-looking document with a seal at the bottom. You're ordered to maintain current water usage and not alter any natural flow. Same order's being delivered to Brennan right now. What does that mean for the dam? Eliza asked. Means it comes down. Water returns to its natural course until the survey's complete. The marshal tipped his hat. I'll be checking back in a week to ensure compliance. After he left, Caleb read the document 3 times, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. This is it, he said. This is actually it. Don't celebrate yet, Eliza warned. Brennan hasn't removed the dam. He has to now. The marshal will enforce it. But Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Men like Brennan didn't lose gracefully. 3 days later, she was proven right. She was in the garden, pulling weeds in the late afternoon heat, when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. She stood and shaded her eyes, her stomach dropping when she saw who it was. Brennan and 4 of his men rode into the yard like they owned it. Caleb emerged from the barn, his face going hard when he saw them. What do you want, Brennan? Just came to have a friendly chat. Brennan dismounted, his men staying in their saddles. About this injunction nonsense. It's not nonsense, it's the law. It's a waste of everyone's time. Brennan stepped closer. You really think a piece of paper is going to change anything? I think you're required to comply with it. Remove the dam. Let the water flow. Oh, I removed it, just like the marshal said. Brennan smiled. Of course, dams can be tricky things. Sometimes they collapse. Sometimes debris blocks a creek naturally. Hard to prove what's man-made and what's not. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. You're going to rebuild it. I'm saying nature takes its course. If that course happens to benefit me, well, that's just luck. You son of a...
Caleb? Eliza's voice cut through the tension. She walked over to stand beside him, facing Brennan directly. You should leave now. Brennan looked at her with amusement. Mrs. Turner. Still here, I see. I figured you'd have run back east by now. I'm not going anywhere. That's a shame. Because your husband's about to lose everything, and you're going to go down with him. He turned back to Caleb. Last chance, Turner. Sell now. Get something for your trouble. Wait any longer, and I'll just buy it at auction when the bank forecloses. Get off my property. Gladly. Brennan swung back onto his horse. But don't say I didn't warn you. They rode out, leaving Caleb and Eliza standing in the yard. Caleb was shaking with rage, and Eliza grabbed his arm before he could do something stupid. We'll tell the marshal, she said. If he rebuilds that dam, he'll find a way around it. You heard him. He'll make it look natural. Caleb pulled away from her. This is pointless. The injunction doesn't matter. The survey doesn't matter. He's going to win because the system's built for men like him. Then we change the system. How? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. She caught his hand again. We've come too far to quit now. He looked at her, and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of fighting a battle that seemed unwinnable. But she also saw something else, a spark of determination that hadn't quite died. All right, he said quietly. We keep fighting. That night, they sat at the table long after dark, trying to figure out their next move. They had the law on their side, at least technically, but Brennan had money and men and no scruples about bending that law until it broke. There has to be something he cares about, Eliza said, something we can use. His reputation, maybe. He likes people thinking he's a legitimate businessman. Then we make noise. We tell everyone what he's doing, make it public. Who's going to listen? Most people around here either work for him or are too scared to cross him. What about the newspaper in the capital or the territorial governor's office? Caleb looked up at her. That might actually work. If we can get someone with authority to pay attention, then Brennan can't just do whatever he wants. Eliza grabbed paper and started writing. We'll document everything, the dam, the timeline, what he said today. We'll send it to every official we can find. It's a long shot. Better than no shot at all. They worked through the night, writing letters and organizing evidence. By dawn, they had a stack of documents ready to mail. It might not work. Probably wouldn't work. But at least they were doing something. As the sun came up, Caleb looked at Eliza across the table, her hair falling out of its pins, ink on her fingers, exhaustion in every line of her body. You're sure about this? He asked. About staying? About fighting? I've never been more sure of anything. He reached across and took her hand. Then we do this together. Together, she agreed. And as the morning light filled the small house, they made a silent promise to each other. Whatever came next, they'd face it side by side. No retreat, no surrender. Just two people who'd chosen each other and were willing to fight for the life they were building, even if the odds were impossible. The letters went out on Monday, carried by the stagecoach driver who promised to see them delivered personally. Caleb had paid extra for that assurance, money they couldn't really spare but couldn't afford not to spend. Now all they could do was wait and hope someone in the territorial capital cared enough to act. In the meantime, they went back to hauling water. The dam had reappeared exactly as Brennan predicted, built to look like a natural blockage. Fallen logs, accumulated brush, stones that could have rolled down from the hillside. But Caleb and Eliza both knew the truth. They'd seen the fresh tool marks on the wood, the deliberate placement of every element. We should tear it down anyway, Caleb said one morning as they filled barrels at the town pump, injunction or not. And give Brennan exactly what he wants? Eliza wiped sweat from her forehead. A reason to come after us for destruction of property? At least we'd have water. For how long? A day? 2 days before he rebuilds it? She shook her head. We play this smart, Caleb. We document what he's done. We wait for the officials to respond. And we don't give him ammunition to use against us. He wanted to argue, she could see it in the set of his jaw, but he knew she was right.
I hate this. Hate feeling helpless. We're not helpless, we're strategic. She finished filling her barrel and moved to the next. There's a difference.
They made the long drive back to the ranch in silence, the wagon wheels creaking under the weight of the water. When they arrived, Eliza noticed something wrong immediately. The chickens were out of their coop, scattered across the yard and squawking frantically. "What the hell?" Caleb jumped down from the wagon and ran toward the coop. The door was hanging open, the wire fence torn apart in places. Eliza's heart sank. Fox? Maybe. But he didn't sound convinced. He walked around the structure, examining the damage. Or something that wanted to look like a fox. "You think, Brennan, I think I don't believe in coincidences." He started gathering the scattered chickens, and Eliza helped. They managed to round up 8 of the 12. The other 4 were just gone. "We can fix the coop," Eliza said, trying to sound practical even though anger was burning in her chest. "Make it stronger." "We can, but that's not the point." Caleb stood with a chicken tucked under each arm, his face dark. "The point is, he's trying to bleed us dry. Little things that we can't prove, can't fight, but that add up." They spent the afternoon repairing the coop and reinforcing the fence. As the sun started to set, a rider appeared on the horizon. Not Brennan this time, John Mackey, riding hard. He pulled up in the yard, his horse lathered with sweat. "We've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" Caleb asked, already moving toward him. "Brennan's been to see the other ranchers, the ones who signed statements with us." John dismounted, catching his breath. "He's offering them deals, water access, favorable prices on feed, help with their herds. All they have to do is withdraw their support." Eliza felt her stomach drop. "Are they taking it?" "2 already have, Martin and Hutchins. They came by my store this morning to tell me they're pulling their statements." John looked at Caleb. "I'm sorry, I tried to talk them out of it, but they're scared," Caleb finished. "Can't blame them for that." "The hell I can't," Eliza said sharply. "They gave their word." "Their word doesn't feed their families," Caleb said. "Brennan knows that. He's using it against them." John pulled an envelope from his coat. "He made me an offer too. Came by the store himself this morning, said he'd guarantee my supply shipments, give me preferred customer status, even throw in some cash for goodwill. All I have to do is stay neutral." "What did you tell him?" Eliza asked. "I told him to get the hell out of my store." John handed the envelope to Caleb. "But I wanted you to see what he's doing. The amount he offered, it's substantial, enough to make most men think twice." Caleb opened the envelope and pulled out a bank draft. His eyebrows rose. "This is a lot of money." "I know." John met his eyes. "But some things you can't buy. I'm with you no matter what. You could lose everything if this goes wrong. So could you, but you're still fighting." John clapped him on the shoulder. "Besides, Margaret would kill me if I back down now. She's already planning what she's going to say when we testify." Despite everything, Caleb smiled. "Tell her thank you." After John left, Caleb and Eliza sat on the porch watching the last of the daylight fade. The bank draft sat on the table between them, a reminder of exactly what they were up against. "He's smart," Eliza said quietly. "Offering carrots instead of sticks makes people want to betray us. Can't really call it betrayal when they're just trying to survive." "Maybe not, but it still hurts." Caleb reached for her hand. "We knew this wouldn't be easy." "I know. I just thought, I don't know what I thought, that doing the right thing would matter more." "It does matter, just not to everyone." He stood and pulled her to her feet. "Come on, let's go to bed. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do next." But tomorrow brought worse news. The marshal returned, this time with a different message. The territorial office had reviewed the case and determined that due to conflicting evidence and witness withdrawals, the injunction would not be renewed. The survey would still proceed, but in the meantime, both parties were free to manage water resources on their own property as they saw fit. In other words, Brennan had won. Again. Caleb listened to the marshal's explanation with a face like stone. When the man finished and rode away, he stood in the yard for a long time, not moving. Eliza came to stand beside him. "Say something." "What's there to say?" His voice was flat. "We lost. He beat us. The survey's still happening. The survey won't matter if we don't have cattle to worry about." He turned to her, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not just exhaustion or an anger, but defeat. We're done, Eliza. We just don't know it yet. Don't say that. Why not? It's true. He gestured at the ranch, at everything they'd built. We can haul water for maybe another month, 2 if we kill ourselves doing it. But eventually, we'll run out of money, run out of strength, or run out of luck. And when that happens, Brennan will be there with his checkbook, ready to buy this place for nothing. Then we find another way. There is no other way! His voice rose, frustration finally breaking through. Don't you get it? I've tried everything. I followed the law, built alliances, documented evidence, played by every rule there is, and it doesn't matter because the system's rigged for men like him. So we rig it back. He laughed bitterly. With what? We don't have money or influence or... We have each other, she interrupted. And we have the truth. And we have something Brennan doesn't have. We're willing to lose everything for what's right. That's not an advantage, Eliza. That's just being stupid. The words hit her like a slap. She stepped back, staring at him. You don't mean that, don't I? He ran his hands through his hair. Maybe I was stupid to think I could make this work. Maybe I was stupid to drag you into it. Maybe the smart thing is to cut our losses and start over somewhere else. Is that what you really want? He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. I don't know what I want anymore. I'm just tired, Eliza. Tired of fighting, tired of losing. She wanted to shake him, to yell at him, to make him remember why they'd started this fight in the first place. But she could see the exhaustion in every line of his body, the way defeat had settled into his bones. So instead, she said the only thing she could think of. Then rest. I'll keep fighting. He looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. What? You heard me. You're tired. Fine. Take a day. Take 2. But I'm not giving up. And I'm not letting you give up either. She moved closer to him. You know what I learned stitching you back together? That sometimes you have to do the hard thing even when you're terrified. Even when it seems impossible. You do it because the alternative is worse. This is different. No, it's not. You're just scared. So am I. But we don't get to quit just because we're scared. She took his hands in hers. You told me once that fair doesn't matter out here. Well, neither does tired. We keep going because that's what we do. He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. Not hope, exactly, but maybe the refusal to surrender completely. You're tougher than I am, he said quietly. No, I'm not. I'm just too stubborn to know when I'm beaten. She squeezed his hands. Now come inside and eat something. We'll figure this out. They went inside, and Eliza made a simple meal while Caleb sat at the table, silent and brooding. She didn't push him to talk, just let him work through whatever he was thinking. When they finished eating, he finally spoke. I'm sorry for what I said out there. I know. I don't really think we should quit. I know that too. He looked at her, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips. When did you get so sure about everything? I'm not sure about anything. I'm just good at pretending. She cleared the plates. But here's what I do know. Brennan's counting on us giving up. That's his whole strategy. Make it hard enough, expensive enough, exhausting enough that we fold. So the one thing we absolutely cannot do is prove him right. Even if it means losing everything, we've already lost everything once, both of us. That's why we're here. She sat back down across from him. The question isn't whether we can afford to lose. It's whether we can afford not to fight. He thought about that, then nodded slowly. All right, so what do? We stop playing defense and start playing offense. What does that mean? It means we stop reacting to what Brennan does and start making our own moves. She pulled out paper and pencil. He's got advantages, money, men, influence. What do we have? Not much? Come on, think. He was quiet for a moment. We know the land better than he does. We know every inch of this property. Good. What else? We've got friends, not many, but the ones we have are solid. Right, and he paused. We've got the truth. All his actions, everything he's done, it's documented. We might not have enough witnesses willing to testify right now, but the evidence exists. Exactly. She started writing. So here's what we do. We can't stop him from diverting the water, but we can make it public, really public. Not just letters to officials who might not care, but something everyone in this territory sees. Like what? I don't know yet, but there has to be a way to force this into the open. Make it so Brennan can't hide behind legal technicalities and intimidation. She looked up at him. What does he care about most? His reputation, being seen as respectable. Then that's what we go after. We show everyone exactly what kind of man he really is. They talked late into the night, building a plan that was probably crazy but might just work. By the time they finally went to bed, Caleb looked less defeated and more focused. Not confident, but determined. You know this could backfire, he said as they lay in the darkness. Make things worse. I know. And you still want to do it? I still want to do it. He pulled her closer. Have I mentioned lately that you're remarkable? Once or twice? She smiled against his shoulder. But I don't mind hearing it again. The next morning, they rode into Sonora together and went straight to the newspaper office. It was a small operation run by a man named Thomas Fletcher, who published the Sonora Weekly Sentinel from a cramped room above the general store. Fletcher was in his 50s, with ink-stained fingers and a skeptical expression that suggested he'd heard every story there was to hear. But he listened as Caleb and Eliza laid out their case, complete with dates, documentation, and witness statements. When they finished, Fletcher leaned back in his chair. This is serious stuff you're alleging. It's not allegations, Caleb said. It's facts. Facts that could get me sued if I print them. Only if they're not true. And they are. Fletcher studied them both. You realize Brennan advertises with me, has for years. Printing this would cost me a good customer. We know, Eliza said, but it would also be the truth. Isn't that what a newspaper is supposed to print? In theory. Fletcher stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street. Tell me something. Why should I risk my business for you two? Because it's not just about us, Caleb said. Brennan's done this to other ranchers. He'll keep doing it unless someone stops him. You print this story, you're not just helping us, you're helping everyone he might go after next. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned back to them. I'll need to verify everything. Talk to witnesses, check records, make sure this story holds water. We understand, Eliza said. And even if I print it, there's no guarantee it'll change anything. Brennan's got friends in high places. We know that too. Fletcher picked up the documentation they'd brought. All right, give me a week. If this checks out, I'll run it front page. But if I find out you've lied to me or exaggerated anything, we're done. Clear? Crystal clear, Caleb said. They shook hands and left the office. As they walked down the street, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Real, fragile hope. You think he'll actually do it? She asked. I think he's honest enough to try, Caleb said. Whether that's enough, we'll find out. The week that followed was tense. They continued hauling water, continued maintaining the ranch, continued waiting for the other shoe to drop. Brennan's men rode past their property twice, watching but not stopping. It felt like the calm before a storm. On Friday, John Mackey came by with news. Fletcher's been all over town asking questions. Talked to me, to the marshal, even went out to Brennan's place. What did Brennan say? Eliza asked. Told him it was all lies and threatened to sue if Fletcher printed a word of it. John grinned. Fletcher told him to try. That night, Caleb and Eliza sat on the porch, watching the sun set. They didn't talk much, just sat close together, taking comfort in each other's presence. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. The Sonora Weekly Sentinel came out on Tuesday morning. The headline read, Water Wars, Local Rancher Accused of Illegal Diversion. The story took up the entire front page and half of page 2, laying out in careful detail exactly what Brennan had done, when he'd done it, and what impact it had on smaller ranchers. Fletcher had done his homework. He'd included statements from the marshal, the territorial representative, and 3 ranchers willing to go on record about similar experiences with Brennan. He'd documented the timeline of the dam construction, the injunction, and Brennan's attempts to buy off witnesses. It was thorough, damning, and absolutely true. Caleb bought 5 copies at the general store. By noon, the whole town was talking about nothing else. Brennan's response came faster than expected. That afternoon, 3 of his men showed up at the ranch with a message. Mr. Brennan wanted to meet with the Turners. Tomorrow, at his property. Come alone. Absolutely not, Eliza said immediately. I have to, Caleb said. If I don't show, he'll claim I'm avoiding him. Then we both go. The message said alone. I don't care what the message said. We're partners, remember? Where you go, I go. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew better. All right, we both go. They arrived at Brennan's ranch the next day at noon, riding side by side. Brennan was waiting on his porch, and for the first time since they'd met him, he didn't look amused. He looked angry. "Turner," he said as they dismounted, "and Mrs. Turner. I should have expected you'd both come." "What do you want, Brennan?" Caleb asked. "I want to know what the hell you think you're doing. Printing lies about me in the newspaper." "They're not lies. Every word in that article is true." "That's a matter of perspective." Brennan came down the steps. "You've made some serious accusations, damaged my reputation." "You damaged your own reputation by stealing our water." "I didn't steal anything. I used resources on my property. Resources that belong to the creek that runs through our land." Eliza stepped forward. "You knew exactly what you were doing, and you knew it was wrong." Brennan's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Mrs. Turner. You're in over your head." "No, I'm not. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Brennan's expression shifted, becoming calculating. "All right, let's talk business. That article made me look bad, but it also made this whole situation messy. Messy enough that territorial officials might actually start paying attention." "That was the idea," Caleb said. "So here's my offer. You print a retraction. Say there was a misunderstanding, that we've worked things out amicably. In exchange, I'll remove the dam permanently. You get your water back, I get my reputation back. Everybody wins." Caleb and Eliza exchanged glances. It was tempting, the solution they'd been fighting for, handed to them on a platter. "What's the catch?" Eliza asked. "No catch. Just the retraction." Brennan spread his hands. "Look, I underestimated you two. I'll admit that. Most people fold when I push. You didn't. That deserves some respect." "We're not printing a retraction," Caleb said. Brennan's smile disappeared. "Excuse me?" "You heard him," Eliza said. "Everything in that article is true. We're not lying just to save your feelings." "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," Caleb said. "But it's our mistake to make. The dam comes down because it's illegal, not because we let you save face." Brennan's face darkened. "You think one newspaper article changes anything? I've got lawyers who'll tie you up in court for years. I've got friends who'll make sure no one in this territory does business with you. I can destroy you." "Then why are you offering a deal?" Eliza asked quietly. "If you're so powerful, why negotiate at all?" The question hung in the air. Brennan looked at her, and for just a moment she saw something flicker across his face. Not quite fear, but close. "Because I don't have to destroy you to win," he said finally, "but I will if you push me." "Then push," Caleb said. "We're not backing down." They rode away from Brennan's ranch in tense silence. When they were out of sight, Caleb pulled Sam to a stop. "We just made an enemy for life," he said. "We already had an enemy for life," Eliza pointed out. "At least now he knows we're serious. He's going to come at us hard." "I know." She looked at him. "Are you sorry we didn't take the deal?" "No." He said it without hesitation. "We did the right thing. Even if it costs us everything?" Even then. They rode home, and for the first time in months, the future felt uncertain but not hopeless. They'd stood up to Brennan, refused his offer, and lived to tell about it. That had to count for something. The fallout from the newspaper article was immediate and widespread. Other ranchers started coming forward with their own stories about Brennan's tactics. The territorial office launched a formal investigation, and the survey team arrived 2 weeks early, apparently motivated by all the public attention. Brennan fought back hard. He filed lawsuits against the newspaper, the Turners, and anyone else who'd spoken against him. He tried to use his influence to shut down the investigation. He even attempted to buy the newspaper itself. But Fletcher stood firm. He printed follow-up articles, each one more detailed than the last. And slowly, public opinion turned against Brennan. People who'd been too scared to speak up before found their courage. The small ranchers who'd withdrawn their support quietly came back, offering new statements. The survey results came back in August, 3 months after the whole mess started. The conclusion was clear. The creek originated on shared watershed land, not on Brennan's property, and he had no legal right to divert it. The territorial office ordered the dam removed and fined Brennan for illegal water diversion. Brennan appealed, of course. The legal battle would drag on for years. But the immediate threat was over. The water returned to its natural course,
and the Turner Ranch had what it needed to survive. Summer turned to fall, and life settled into a new rhythm. The cattle thrived. The garden produced more than they could eat, so Eliza started putting up preserves for winter. They even added 2 more calves to the herd, bringing their total count to 18. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Caleb turned to Eliza with a thoughtful expression. "You ever think about how different this could have gone?" he asked. "All the time. If you hadn't gotten off that stagecoach in the storm, if you'd turned back when things got hard, if you'd given up when I wanted to. But I didn't." She leaned against his shoulder. "And neither did you in the end. Because you wouldn't let me." He kissed the top of her head. "You saved this ranch, you know. Not me. You. We saved it. Together." "Yeah." He pulled her closer. Together. They sat in comfortable silence, and Eliza thought about everything they'd been through. The fear, the exhaustion, the moments when giving up seemed like the only rational choice. But they'd pushed through all of it, not because they were particularly brave or strong, but because they'd refused to let go of each other or the life they were building. "I'm pregnant," she said suddenly. Caleb went very still. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 3 months, I think. I wasn't sure for a while, but..." She looked up at him. "Are you happy?" He stared at her, and she saw his eyes fill with tears. "Happy? Eliza, I'm..." He couldn't finish. He just pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "I know the timing isn't great," she said into his shoulder. "With everything still unsettled, the timing's perfect," he said fiercely. "The timing's exactly right." They held each other as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, and the cattle lowed in response. The sounds of the ranch, the sounds of home. Winter came, and with it, new challenges. But they faced them together, the way they'd faced everything else. Caleb cut firewood while Eliza knitted tiny clothes. They reinforced the barn against the cold and made sure the cattle had shelter. John and Margaret came by regularly, bringing supplies and staying for supper. The legal battle with Brennan continued in the background, but it felt distant now, like something happening to other people. They'd won the fight that mattered, the right to stay, to build, to live. In February, during a snowstorm that blanketed the ranch in white, Eliza went into labor. Margaret came to help, bringing clean cloths and calm competence. Caleb paced outside the bedroom door, terrified and useless, until Margaret finally told him to either come in or go check on the cattle. He came in. 20 hours later, their daughter was born, tiny, red-faced, screaming at the world with impressive lung capacity. Caleb held her with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's beautiful," Eliza said, exhausted and happy. They named her Sarah, after Eliza's mother. And as Caleb sat beside the bed, holding his wife's hand and watching their daughter sleep, he thought about the advertisement he'd placed in that Philadelphia newspaper, the desperate gamble that had brought Eliza into his life. "Best decision I ever made," he said quietly. "What was?" "Asking you to come here, marrying you, all of it." Eliza smiled. "Mine too." Spring arrived, bringing green grass and new calves and the promise of another season. The Turner Ranch had survived its first full year, and it was stronger for all the trials it had endured. Fletcher printed another article, this one about small ranchers who'd stood up to powerful interests and won. The Turners were featured prominently. Though Caleb and Eliza both insisted on downplaying their role, they weren't heroes, they said, just people who'd refused to quit. But to the other small ranchers struggling to make it in Texas, they were something more. They were proof that you could fight the system and win. That partnership mattered, that the little guy didn't always have to lose. Brennan's empire began to crack that summer. More ranchers filed complaints against him. The territorial office levied additional fines. Some of his workers, disgusted by his tactics, quit and went to work for the smaller operations he'd tried to destroy. His reputation, once untouchable, became something people questioned. He never recovered, not really. He stayed in the area, still running his ranch, but the power he'd wielded so easily was gone. People had learned they could say no to him. And once you learned that, you couldn't unlearn it. 5 years after Eliza first stepped off that stagecoach into the storm, the Turner Ranch had become something remarkable. The small, struggling operation had grown into a thriving enterprise with 40 head of cattle, a proper barn, a new well,
and a vegetable garden that produced enough to sell at market. Sarah had grown into a bright, curious child who followed her father everywhere and peppered him with questions he couldn't always answer. She rode Dusty before she could properly walk, and she helped her mother tend the chickens with fierce concentration. They'd added 2 rooms to the house, making space for the second child, a son named James, who arrived 3 years after Sarah. The house was noisy now, full of children's laughter and occasional tears and the constant chaos of family life. But it was home. Real, solid, permanent home. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Sarah and James chase fireflies in the yard, Eliza turned to Caleb with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we'd given up?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at all this." He gestured at the ranch, the children, the life they'd built. "And I can't imagine it any other way." "Neither can I." She took his hand. "We were so scared back then. We're still scared sometimes." "True. But now we know we can handle it." He smiled at that. "Yeah, we do." Sarah ran up to the porch, a firefly cupped in her small hands. "Mama, look, I caught one." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Now let it go so it can find its family." Sarah opened her hands, and the firefly flew away, its light blinking in the darkness. She watched it go with wide eyes, then ran back to join her brother. Caleb and Eliza watched their children play, and they thought about everything they'd survived to get here. The storm, the struggle, the moment of crisis when everything hung in the balance, the choice to fight instead of flee. "You know what I learned from all this?" Eliza said quietly. "What?" "That brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what you have to do anyway." She looked at him. "You taught me that." "I think we taught each other." They sat together in the gathering darkness, listening to their children's laughter and the familiar sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. And they knew, with the kind of certainty that only comes from hard-won experience, that they'd made the right choice. Not because it had been easy, it had been brutal, but because they'd done it together, and in doing so, they'd built something that couldn't be taken away. Not by drought or debt, or men like Brennan, who thought power was the same thing as worth. They'd built a partnership, a family, a life that belonged to them. Years later, when Sarah was old enough to ask how her parents had met, Eliza would tell her the story. About the letters, the storm, the desperate walk through mud and rain. About the bull and the stitches and the choice to fight when giving up seemed easier. Sarah would listen with wide eyes and ask, "Were you scared, Mama?" And Eliza would tell her the truth. Terrified, every single day. "Then how did you do it?" "I had your father, and your father had me, and together we were strong enough." It was a simple answer, but it was true. Neither of them had been particularly brave or brilliant or blessed with good fortune. They'd just been 2 people who refused to give up on each other or the life they were building. And in the end, that had been enough. The ranch continued to grow, eventually becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. When Texas finally achieved statehood, the Turners were there, proud to be part of something bigger than themselves. Caleb lived to see his children grown and his grandchildren born. He taught his sons and daughters the same lesson he'd learned that first year with Eliza, that success wasn't about avoiding hardship, but about facing it head-on with someone you trusted beside you. And Eliza, who'd left Philadelphia as a desperate woman with no prospects and no hope, became known throughout the county as someone who'd helped build not just a ranch, but a community. She taught school for local children, organized the ranchers' cooperative that protected small operations from predatory buyers, and never once let anyone forget that the little guy could win if they stuck together. When people asked her how she'd done it, built such a remarkable life from nothing, she'd smile and tell them it hadn't been from nothing. She'd had something invaluable all along. She'd had a partner who believed in her, and she'd believed right back. That, more than anything else, had made all the difference. The storm that had brought her to Texas had been brutal and terrifying, but it had also delivered her to exactly where she needed to be. To a man who needed her as much as she needed him. To a life that demanded everything from her and gave back even more. And years later, when she stood on that same porch and looked out over land that stretched to the horizon, land that bore her family's name and carried their legacy, she'd think about the girl who'd stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but a bag and a desperate hope. That girl had been terrified of failure, but she'd been wrong to be scared, because the real failure would have been never trying at all.